Good morning, everyone. I'm Nathan Shapura, Senior Political Advisor at the European People's Party. And on behalf of the EPP, welcome to this episode of EPP Family Talks. This morning, we have the great privilege to welcome Mr. Johannes Hahn, Vice President of the European People's Party and European Commissioner for Budget and Administration. Mr. Hahn, Commissioner, Vice President, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us this morning.
Great pleasure and welcome to everybody. And good morning.
Could I just ask you, first of all, how are you doing? This is another lockdown this year for us in Brussels and across many parts of Europe. Are you doing okay?
Personally, yes, with the exception that I'm in a way away from my family. I'm used to spend at least the weekends back home, but even this is not possible for the moment. But other than that, it's okay.
You have, as part of your portfolio, one of the most important issues facing the European Union now, and that's under budget and administration, the negotiations for the budget for the next 7 years, the multi-annual financial framework. And I want to talk to you about that. But before we get into that, into your own portfolio, I wanted to ask you about something which hits, I think, very close to home for many people, and especially for you, and that is the terrorist attack on the 2nd of November in Vienna, in your home country of Austria. So could I first just ask you, for anyone who might not know, what happened in this terrorist attack? What do we know?
Yeah, as it looks of today, there was only one perpetrator, but apparently he had a lot of supporters because it's not so easy to get weapons and ammunition and so on. But it took only, I think, less than 10 minutes. But in these 10 minutes, he killed 4 people and injured, I think, 16 or 17. So it was a tragedy because it was the last evening before a lockdown, and it was a very mild evening. Many people were still on the street, enjoyed this probably last nice evening, and then such a situation happened. Many people never thought that this could happen in a city like Vienna, where we are used not to have any securities around us. Politicians don't have bodyguards. Only the state president and the prime minister are usually protected. All the others can move freely. It's something we would like to keep also for the future, but we have to see this is an international phenomenon development, and I think more than ever international cooperation is necessary. Of course, we will also with the means of the next multi-annual financial framework reinforce all these agencies dealing with security matters across Europe and also internationally.
Well, that's a transition maybe to talking about the multi-annual financial framework more broadly. This is something which on your Twitter feed you have pinned as a tweet, deal done. This is the MFF, the multi-annual financial framework for the next 7 years, which includes the next generation EU package dealing specifically with the coronavirus response. I wonder, could you just take us through the major moments, the major points of the story over the last many months of how this deal got done?
Yeah, actually, the whole story, if you like, started already in 2018 when the previous Commission presented its draft for the multi-annual financial framework. There was finally a failed attempt amongst prime ministers, heads of states in February on this. But then immediately afterwards, the whole corona crisis started, and we had to rethink the whole concept. And it was very soon very clear that we have to give a very strong also financial response to it. And that's why we created, in a nutshell, this recovery and resilience facility, which is the biggest bulk of what we call Next Generation EU. These are these 750 billions on top of the so-called core MFF, aiming to support primarily member states to react to this crisis. And these 750 is split into two main parts. One is around 390 for grants and 360 for loans offered and provided to member states which don't have the same favorable conditions at the capital market like the union can get, and this is why we have constructed this structure. Um, uh, Everything is also aiming at helping countries not only to recover but to become more resilient, to be more fit for future challenges. It will certainly it will not be the last crisis. We don't know when the next occurs and what are the reasons for it. But we have to equip, if you like, all our member states better to weather such a crisis. And this is exactly the task of this Recovery and Resilience Fund. That's why it is also linked to the European semester recommendations. And finally, so the rationale behind all this is that at the end of the day, we should be even stronger after this crisis than before. So we are trying to use the momentum and, of course, pursuing our political priorities, Green Deal, digitalization, and I think the crisis have even demonstrated how important it is to stick to our political priorities.
Let me just ask a follow-up, which maybe is a stupid question, but maybe a question that many people have just about the structures themselves. There's the next generation EU, which is the 750 billion, which you mentioned as part of the next MFF or in addition to the next MFF for the next 7 years. And then there's the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Is the Recovery and Resilience Facility something separate to next generation EU, or is it sort of the mechanism by which the next generation EU funds will be spent on these long-term reform efforts that you mentioned, the greening and digitization?
No, if you like, Next Generation EU is the labeling for this whole response package of 750 billions, which is actually 2018 prices. So today it might be already around 800 billions. And once again, the 750 consists of 360 of loans, and the 390 are split into several programs or initiatives. The biggest one is the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is altogether 312.5 billion. Another 45 is a program which is called REACT-EU, which should help member states to finance the immediate costs stemming from this crisis. Therefore, it can also be used retroactively since the beginning of the crisis this March. And the remaining amount is used to reinforce existing programs at the European Union level. These are the 750. And then on top, we had a budget proposed or decided by the heads of states and prime minister of 1,074 billion euro. And here in the negotiations with the European Parliament, there could be an agreement, there could be found an agreement to top up this amount by another 16 billions. And this is now altogether, if you like, the core MFF around 1,090 billion euro. And on top we have this 750 billion. So altogether it's more than 1.8 trillion. I think a huge amount, but you have to see it's for 7 years. Next Generation EU has to be committed within the first 3 years, but bills can be submitted another 3 years. So I think altogether we have managed to create something unprecedented, but the situation we are facing is also unprecedented. That's why we had to introduce this. But in order to make this possible, we had also to introduce or to break with some taboos. and one of these taboos was to have additional new own resources. So for the first time since the 80s, we will have new own resources, which where the Commission will make a proposal mid of next year, and then member states and also the Parliament, but in particular member states, have to decide about it, because these new own resources should finance the repayment of the borrowing, the capitals and the interests. And this is something unique, if you like, and is a real breakthrough, but it was without alternatives. Otherwise, member states would have to provide higher national contributions, which is in a situation where all the public households are in a dire situation, certainly not something which is possible. And the new own resources we are proposing are linked to our political priorities, green and digital, but also more tax fairness, pushing, so to say, our climate goals, also in the way that we try to create an even playing field also with partners from outside Europe, which maybe are not so advanced in their climate change related policies. And here, for instance, a border carbon mechanism should help to generate this even playing field in the way that products imported to the European Union but produced with much more CO2 emissions should have an additional, let's say, levy in order to compensate the higher production costs in Europe due to the fact that we apply much more modern technologies. This is one example. There are others like the digital tax and so on, which will certainly finally contribute to these revenues which are necessary once again to pay the bonds, and not only the bonds but also the interests which are related to them. So all in all, I think a very interesting, very advanced architecture, and I think we all can be proud that at the end of the day, again, Europe has proven to be able to act to protect their citizens.
Thanks so much for that explanation. That was very helpful. So, of course, as you just mentioned, these are not just numbers and sort of Excel files. These are projects which translate into concrete benefits for European citizens. I want to touch on something you just mentioned, which is partners outside the EU. As the vice president of the EPP, one of the things you're really particularly focused on is the Western Balkans. You were commissioner for enlargement under the commission of President Jean-Claude Juncker. What does the MFF, the multi-annual financial framework, mean for EU enlargement for these next 7 years?
Yeah, if the MFF is finally adopted in the way we have now agreed at the chief negotiators level, it will also mean that in particular the countries in the Western Balkans will receive more than in the current period, and this is certainly necessary to help them not only to overcome the crisis but to catch up to the economic and life level of people in the European Union. So I think also here we have shown that enlargement at the Western Balkans is clearly a political priority of us.
And then the final policy-related question relating to your portfolio, and that is about the annual budget for 2021. This is a separate process, let's say, from the MFF. So could you explain for our listeners what the state of play is for the next annual budget negotiations, and why is also this a really critical thing to have agreed?
Yeah, that's why it was so important to get a political agreement on the MFF last week, because by the end of last week we had also a legal deadline to come forward with a modified draft budget for 2021, which we did. This week we will have the first dialogue, and finally at the latest till the 7th of December we should have an agreement in order to have a budget based on the MFF as of beginning next year. But I'm confident that this is possible after all the achievements we have reached in the MFF agreements. Of course, 2021 will be to a certain extent a breakdown of the 7 years, but certainly there's some details which have to be negotiated. Sorry, I can't hear you. Maybe you have to unmute. Yes, we don't hear you. Sorry, there's no connection. I don't hear you.
Can you
Now it's okay.
can you hear me and see me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, you vanished for me also. So you were just talking about the annual budget 2021. You've had all these months of very intense negotiations. The work is not finished in the next few weeks and months. There's so much more to be done. I wanted to, if I could, finish this interview with a couple of more personal, more informal questions, as we've done with many of our other EPP leaders, especially during frankly, such a difficult year for all of us. It's nice to have a bit of an informal moment as well. And the first question is, just in such a difficult year as this has been, is there a historical figure that you have found particularly helpful or inspirational to consider?
Well, I don't have a particular figure in mind. I really admire everybody who, in the current situation, but also in the past, have shown leadership in the way that one is not only looking at the next elections and trying to do things which are, so to say, supporting a potential re-election or to win elections. But my understanding of leadership is that somebody takes decision in the interest of a country, of the European Union, of citizens, of course, finally. And sometimes not every decision might be popular, might get support immediately, but is probably necessary in order to protect citizens' interest. For instance, the way we are living together in the European Union, in Europe, and these are the people, the man, the woman I admire, which can, so to say, look beyond the next elections, which are brave enough to take political decisions. This the one group of people. The other ones are those who have helped to create democracy, who are defending democracy, and in the current system, those who are protecting and further developing multilateralism, because in a peaceful world we can only live together if we are bound to international agreements, contracts, which are finally respected and on which we can rely. And for this we need people which we can trust, in which we have confidence. And I think last week was a good week for this expectation when Joe Biden was finally confirmed to be the next president of the United States. This doesn't mean that everything will now be an easygoing in our relationship with the US, but I think it's a person on which where we can have kind of reassurance that he is equally interested in what we call multilateralism and will bring back the US to the level we had before Trump.
And the final question we have for you, is there something you have recently read or watched which you would recommend to our viewers?
Well, I used to have light luggage. That's why I have in my different homes different books. But I used to read some books in the last couple of months about European-Chinese relationship or the growing impact of China on the global market. But I also read a book about Russian history because I think it's always good to understand, so to say, the history of certain people in order to understand better and to be more, so to say, understandable about different political developments and how to negotiate and to find finally agreement. And the same applies for Africa. I think it's good to inform ourselves more about the situation in Africa. Africa is not, so to say, generally a development region. There are some rather advanced, in particular cities. On the other hand, you have very underdeveloped regions and parts. So I think it's good to have a better understanding about what's going on a global scale. But in between, I certainly read something else. Just yesterday, I finished a book about 25 forgotten civilizations, and it's quite interesting to see and to read why certain civilizations didn't survive or have been merged to others, and what would have happened if those civilizations might have survived compared to others. So learning from history is a precondition to understand better the present and to shape the future.
Those sound like very wise words. It seems clear you have a very not only global but long-term perspective, which is so helpful. Maybe in particular in our world now, which is so instantaneous, and politics can feel so instantaneous. So, Mr. Johannes Hahn, Vice President of the European People's Party, European Commissioner for Budget and Administration, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us this morning on behalf of the EPP. Thanks for the very good work that you're doing, and we look forward to hearing from you and talking with you again soon.
Thank you, and stay safe.
To you as well. To all of our viewers, thanks for tuning in to this episode of EPP Family Talks. Have a great day.